Thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a post-lunch history lesson about change. And hopefully you will all find it very interesting for your own current businesses. So basically, as Steve said, I'm the head of Global Strategic Partnerships for Fullscreen. And as you all know, I'm sure, as everybody has been talking about today, there's been a big theme of change throughout the conference and how to actually advantage yourselves to take advantage of it. And so essentially, I want to start back in the 1880s when cinema was first invented. And there were a few different actors that were operating at the time, but the one that kind of lasted as the first to exhibit their own works were the Lumiere brothers. This is back in 1888 and around that time period. And the very first exhibition of cinema that was ever given was a train approaching the station. I'm not going to try to pronounce that in French because it'll sound terrible. And essentially, all it really was a train approaching a station. But for the time, it was about as revolutionary a piece of media that has ever been produced. This is what this is, and you'll see. It's a train going to a station. But the sound you hear was a pianist in the theater. It wasn't actually as part of the movie. So at the time, the way that the story goes is that this incited a riot within the theater because the people had never seen anything like this. So when they saw a train coming towards them, the wives' tale is that half of them came sprinting to the back trying to get away from it before they were crushed by a moving train. And that is it. This was the very origins of what we know as film or video today. And so that then moved on through the silent movie era, which had many, many different stars to it, including Charlie Chaplin, who you see on screen right now. And this was, as most of you know, the beginning of our industry for film and television. This was the first time that we were able to monetize a piece of filmed, in this case, film. But then in 1927, the jazz singer came. And the jazz singer is famous for being the first, what was then called talkies. So movies that actually talked was a brilliant, huge idea back then. It was revolutionary, and it would make it so that we had the rest of our industry to grow. At the time, though, that disruption didn't benefit everybody because there were more than a handful of actors who were great in the silent film days who sucked when they got to talking. And you couldn't possibly put them on screen if they were actually acting with their voices. So they were the first to be out of business about something. And so then World War II came, and there was a disruption in that. But at the same time, in about 1950 is when the television, and this is in the U.S., when the television was introduced to U.S. populations. As you can see, back in its heyday in the 1940s, there was about 80% of the U.S. population that was going to a movie a week, so paying to go to a movie a week. Within 10 years, it went from 80% to 20%. And that change was so unbelievably monumental to the film companies that the film companies started producing television. And so in 1960, the top-rated show on television was Gunsmoke. Now, in the U.S., in 1960, you couldn't ad skip, you couldn't TiVo. You had to watch Gunsmoke at 9 o'clock on Saturday on CBS, or you wouldn't have seen it. It would not be there. And so to think 37 million people in a population of 100 million watched one show at one airing shows you the power of what television was back in the heyday of television. But then, of course, we know what happens next. So now pay cable is introduced. It didn't happen overnight, but eventually pay cable outpaced what broadcast would be as an aggregate, when that was unheard of or unthinkable at the time, that cable TV, the ghetto of television, could actually do better than what we had on broadcast. And as you know, I'm going to use an example. So HBO started in 1974 airing movies. home box office, HBO. So that was their channel. It was a cable channel dedicated entirely to watching movies. At the time, executives were saying, well, who wants to watch movies on TV? That's stupid. And now, this is Dream On, 1989. Their very first scripted comedy. And it took them from 1974, about 15 years later. In between, there's some kids programming like Fraggle Rock. There was also some cheap sports programming. But this was their first attempt at scripted. And I wanted you to kind of take a look at this.
First, on Dream On, everything okay at the doctor?
Oh, it was nothing. He just had some finishing touches on his new penis.
You have a new penis?
Hey. You pump it up like a football.
Sounds like a very big success.
All right. So is that the HBO you know? No. This is the HBO you know. This giant, wild production values, these sweeping $100 million epics that they're producing. This is HBO to us. So when we look at how overnight change isn't really what we're talking about, it's change over decades. And it's accelerating at a pace that we've never seen before, to the point where I think, as a lot of the people on stage today have been talking about, it's disrupting business to again, another evolution of what we're doing, including, and in particular, the behavior that is changing from our audiences that we're trying to reach. So as you can see, in 5 years, we've had precipitous drops in the demos that matter. Now let's see if I can get this right. All right, perfect. So 18 to 24, 25 to 34 have a combined 68% loss in viewership in traditional television. Now, as programmers, that's a pretty big deal when you talk about when our monetization strategies are generally based on live or C3 windows, if you're talking about commercial television, which accounts for a lot of what we all do at the end of it. And so what ends up happening here next is this. So how many of you have one of these in your pocket? Doesn't have to be an iPhone. All right. So you'd be an outcast if you didn't, right? So it's a very interesting time to be. Let me ask you a question. I'm curious to hear your responses. How many, on average, how many times do you think the average person touches their phone? 500 times? 1,000. Daily. 1,000? Higher than 1,000. Okay, I got a couple for the ones that played. Thank you. 2,617 times a day is what the average person, how the average person touches their phone, which goes to show you that the disruption of this device and subsequent devices, whether it's a desktop or a laptop, this is the new entertainment medium. This is where we get our news, our sports. This is where we watch our catch-up shows if we're in the tube or if we're going to work. This is everything, particularly also among the under demos. And so now, this has been replaced with this. Now, is it replaced or is it additive? I believe there's a mix there. However, the under demos consumer behavior has been such that it's this and never this. Never this. They never watch television the way we want them to, the way that we can actually monetize it. So what does that mean for everybody? In a world of fragmented channels, in a world of fragmented apps, where Snapchat can start 3 years ago and now account for 300 million users, 500 million users, 10 billion video views a day, where Facebook has the same kind of viewership. How many people check Facebook today? So my point in this is that in the middle of this change, and this I'm just giving you a context, isn't meant to be a promotional, is where we live as a company, is full screen. And because mostly video killed the TV star or the movie star. So there's this great article that was read in Jezebel, which is a Gawker media site, back when they existed, that essentially the reporter was at her Thanksgiving back in the States. And so she went downstairs and she saw 6 or 7 of her little nieces and cousins all playing, downstairs and watching their phones. And she said, well, listen, there's a new Brad Pitt movie on. And they all looked at her and said, well, who's Brad Pitt? And she was kind of flabbergasted by this. And she goes, well, what about Angelina Jolie? That's his wife. They have no idea who either of them are. It should be really kind of telling to everybody who produces these big television series and movies that these are the stars of this generation to a very large percentage of your kids and some of your younger friends, where these stars, KSI, PewDiePie, Niga, Smosh, all mean something more than a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce. Now, I don't want to say this is oppositional. There's a spectrum here. There are ways that we're looking at combining multiple of these media together and on a daily basis. So as kids are watching YouTube, particularly for their stars, they're also watching Hulu on catch-up or RTE on catch-up, and there's a much bigger mix of media. Because let's face it right now, television has never been better. We are seeing an unprecedented look at what our end line of television has become, which is the best shows we've ever put out as producers. However, this is where the young people are. This is where the young people are decision makers who you can get as brands, who you can actually entertain in a new way, are. So as your brands are starting to look or feel or maybe test a little bit stodgier, this is where your audience is, to entertain. And so as you look through the idea that these are the new entertainers of this world, right? There's plenty of room for traditional brands to play in this space, whether it's as advertisers or as content creators. So if you look at the idea of creating shows, NBC Universal in the States just announced that they were going to do 10 new Snapchat shows that they were producing that Snapchat was monetizing. There's a wealth of outlets for programming and creativity, particularly among this set, where this set is reaching hundreds of millions, if not billions of people a day, where this is the new programming. And as we look at what we do, we've built a company that has an ability to have multiple hooks into this new world, whether it's our creator network, which has 70 or 80,000 creators that reach over 6 billion video views a month, or it's our entertainment division where we launched our SVOD service in April, which is number 2 behind Netflix, because it stars many of the same types of people that we have on our YouTube channels or that our audiences under demo, under 25, under 29, really want to see. And our BrandWorks. And BrandWorks, I think, is particularly interesting because there's a world that people are starting to be bombarded with, which is this YouTube world. When it comes down to it, there's an evolution of thinking that needs to happen. And for every brand, whether you're a producer or you're a TV network or you're a studio, where you're thinking to yourselves like programmers for a new technology. So as TV is broadcast as a medium, there's a variety of technology that goes into programming it effectively. The same is said for the internet. And from the original entertainment you provide or working with influencers to get out messaging, those are obviously key pieces to this. But channel management and optimization is a huge portion of this. Well, you're creating algorithms, you're programming to the algorithms of Google or Facebook to get your programming seen to the world, in addition to looking at how do you constantly become a part of their lives and create authenticity for your viewership that is around Facebook or around Snapchat or Musical.ly or Lively or YouNow or any of the platforms that are growing on a daily basis. Those are the wins that you can have as brands or as producers. And then, of course, media as a paid media outlet to everything is a very important thing when you're looking to get your messages out to the world. And so I'm going to end this by showing a clip from our new SVOD service before I go into Q&A with Aiden. Here we go.
What if someone comes?
That's the whole point.
Is there anything I shouldn't talk
I
about?
don't think so, no.
Say you have some Viagra laying around. Like if I broke up with your dad.
Oh my God.
If I were you, I'd post a nude.
Real mature, guys. Real funny.
But I feel really alone right now because I'm in the bathroom talking to a camera.
So as you can tell, there's a mix of traditional celebrities with online content creators in formats that are both native to online properties, social properties, and also a departure in certain ways so that the young voices of this world are being heard in an authentic way for their audiences in many, many different ways across many, many different platforms.